If you're hailing Thor and Odin, you have no business hailing Hitler. National Socialism is diametrically opposed to heathenism. The two have no common ground. National Socialism is a political ideology that gives all power to the state, that harshly subjects the people to the state, deprives people of basic freedoms to give the state total control, and the state takes control in both the public and private life. And we see that. If you want to know exactly how it was framed out, take a look at a document called the 25 Points of National Socialism. These were written in 1920, before the Nazis really got on a roll there. And it's a blueprint almost for where they wanted to go. And you can see right there the subjugation of the people. Heathenism is about the freedom of the people. Heathenism is about the people having the right to vote, having the right to assemble, to choose leaders who are going to be wise and helpful, to limit the power of those leaders by the assembly, known as the thing, to work as hard as possible to assure real justice in its courts and its other proceedings, to uphold the sanctity of the family, so that the state was not someone that the heathen people served then. The state served the people. The government served the people, as we have today. You know, cynical as people may get about the government, and I admit there are things wrong with the government today. This is still a nation of, by, and for the people. Nazism opposes that. We also see in its actions taking populations who were not criminal. They weren't committing crimes. They weren't trying to undermine the society, but rounding up these people and dealing with them with a tremendous harshness. You know, I mean, it's not even a clean kill. It's to torture them miserably before killing them. Those people didn't deserve to die, and they didn't deserve to be tortured. What kind of fractured mind thinks this is all right? And yeah, it's not just the Nazis. Stalin did the same thing. He was just as bad. He just had a different way of picking his targets. The Japanese, the atrocities done by the Japanese in the 30s and 40s are horrendous. It doesn't minimize what the Nazis did, and it certainly doesn't minimize what the Japanese or Stalinists did either. It was all wrong. All those things are opposed against the spirit of heathenism. That kind of horror and tragedy isn't our way. We don't come up with things like that. Heathens don't come up with things like forced labor like that, with forced labor camps and extermination camps. You know, heathenism did not come up with ideas of Untermenschen, subhumans, as a justification to treat people wrong. When the Nazis marched into Poland, they took businesses and other things owned by Polish citizens and just arbitrarily handed them over to Germans, deprived the people who had earned and built those businesses and things. That's what Nazism does. Heathenism is opposed to that. You don't take something that someone made and earned. You know, just so many excesses. And another thing, to show you the silliness of Nazism, in Poland, there were two different parts of Poland, two different party chiefs, and the one to determine who could be treated as a second-class citizen and not. The guy was, well, if you're Polish, you're out, and if you're German, you're okay. The other guy said, well, if you sign a paper saying you're German, we'll accept you as you're German. And, arbitrary, but still dangerous and hateful. Heathenism is not about that sort of thing. We certainly don't have a cast of characters like they had in the Third Reich. You wouldn't certainly get a Heinrich Himmler or Joseph Goebbels or any of those characters floating around. and yet they're very destructive people. You know, and the level of hatred, just the heathenism, has nothing to do with that. Let's be honest, bluntly honest. There is nowhere in the old law of heathenism that speaks of racism as a policy. It just isn't there. The old heathen law doesn't speak of the Jews who were the main group targeted by the Nazis. And yet you look in the Nazi law, all they do is write about the Jews. And anyone who's lived in an area where there is a large Jewish population knows that all the stuff the Nazis wrote was pure bullshit. You know, I lived in an area, for most of my life, I've lived within 100 miles of New York City, which has got one of the largest Jewish populations in the world. These are people I knew, neighbors, friends, even relatives. And they're just people with different origin, maybe. The worship's a little different, but than most of the other religions around, and that's about it. These aren't the malicious, evil-minded people. There's no conspiracy there. There's no desire to do wrong. There's no lack of a moral conscience there. Like I say, I live with these people, for those who don't know them. So if you trust me, trust my experience. The Jews are like everyone else. Good people mostly, trying to get by, just a little bit different way of worshiping and such. A little different origin. You know, they got their ancestors got on a boat maybe off a different pier than someone else's. And that's it. There is nothing in them that warrants hatred, that warrants the kind of hatred especially that Nazism flung at them. There is nothing that they do that warrants the accusations hurled against them. And heathenism, being a religion of justice and truth, well, we don't go hurling accusations at people unjustly. So we have no business buying into that kind of nonsense. No business at all. Again, Nazism is diametrically opposed to what we as heathens believe and hold dear. And those heathens who claim to believe that National Socialism goes hand in hand with their heathen beliefs are wrong. They're woefully mistaken. Now I want to clear one little matter up here, and it's getting out of line. They use universalists for heathens who supposedly tolerate everyone, and folkish for those who want to keep it just within certain ethnic lines and such. And these words are bandied around so that they don't mean anything anymore. I don't see anything wrong if some heathens want to group together and just keep it within, say, a shared ethnic background, because non-whites do it, and politically correct folks says, oh, they're experiencing their culture. Okay, if people want to do that, fine. So long as none of the hatred is there. There's none of that Nazism there. But for the rest of us who choose not to do that, who pretty much open to anyone who wants to come and sample our beliefs and such, well, we shouldn't be vilified for that either, should we? But I think what we all should understand is the real enemy are people promoting National Socialist type policies and trying to masquerade as heathen, because it's very misleading. They're very loud, they're very aggressive, and they make a lot more noise than their size warrants. But that is the real problem. You shouldn't be hailing Hitler if you want to hail Odin and hail Thor and hail the other gods and goddesses. Our gods are about freedom. Our gods are about well-being, about fairness, about doing good. Certainly, there's no room in there for the excesses or any of the nonsense with the Third Reich. Likewise, there's nothing in us that has any good thing to say about Stalin and his activities, or the activities of the Japanese during World War II, or a modern-day Hitler Saddam Hussein, I mean, there was nothing good in that man either. You know, we need sometimes, I think, to take a look and to say, where do we stand? Where do we draw the line? We are a people of freedom and justice. That's the heathen way. It's always been that way. Let's carry on that tradition. Freedom, folks. Oh, and by the way, if you want to read something political that might be more along heathen lines, try something like Thomas Paine, Ben Franklin. I think they are much closer to what we believe than, or certainly far closer than anything out of the Reich. None of that really works with us. But Thomas Paine and Ben Franklin certainly do work with us, and they would have made darn fine heathens if they'd have taken up our beliefs all the way. So that's where we stand. The United States, our Constitution, our freedom, our whole revolution is really in line more with heathenism than anything else. And maybe one day the Christians will wake up and say, you know what? The heathenism, that's really the way to go. So I'm going to just leave it at that. It's time for us to take that stand. I never anticipated I would have to address politics or race or such issues when we first went public with our brand of heathenism over 20 years ago. But sadly, the situation is such that we do have to address it. And I'm sorry it has to be that way. I firmly believe, and I'll leave you with this thought: treat every person fairly, whether you like them or not. Hail Thor.